Good morning. Kalimera σας.
Θέλω να εκφράσω την ευγνωμοσύνη μου προς την Αυτούθητάτη Παναγιότητα που μου επιτρέπει να εργαστώ με την Επιτροπή Κατευθυντήρια Επιτροπή για την τέλεση του συνεδρίου, και θέλω να ευχαριστήσω και τον Μητροπολίτη Γεράσιμο του Σαν Φρανσίσκο για την στήριξή του και τον Παπασταύρο Κοφινά για την αγάπη του, την ενθάρρυνσή του, για τον τρόπο που με βοήθησε να δουλέψω σε αυτή τη διακονία που μας καθιστά ποιμένες και συμβούλους στα πλαίσια της αγάπης και της μακροθυμίας του Κυρίου. Χαρά μου που παρουσιάζω τον σεβασμιότατο Μητροπολίτη Αλεξανδρουπόλεως κύριο Άνθιμο, από τους σημαίνοντες ιεράρχες της Εκκλησίας μας. Θα μιλήσει για την απογοήτευση των θεραπώντων, τη διαχείριση προβλημάτων και διεξόδους. Έχετε το λόγο, σεβασμιότατε. I failed to say something. I meant to ask His Eminence of Cameroon, but I'd like to express my disappointment over his talk, because you disappointed us, Your Eminence. We say things so beautifully about the incarnation, about Thodis, and the things you said were very painful. It was so distressing. I mean, it was so lovely for us to be at a theoretical level as we discussed all this stuff, and suddenly you threw a pall over our soul. But indeed, I'm grateful. Your Eminence of Rhodes and organizers, we are very grateful to you for what you have done with your love and your discerning manner. Your Eminences, Reverend Fathers, sisters and brothers, dear delegates, I'm glad that I'm of the final speakers of the conference now, that we have done with enthusiasm of the commencement ceremony and the official addresses. And all that remains is serious concerns over our issue, especially on the lines of His Eminence of Cameroon. Father Stavros on Wednesday thanked speakers for coming to shed light for the benefit of the audience with our knowledge and experience, but this didn't happen. Praise God, something more significant happened, and I found that so very salutary. We arrived at the view that life, pain, sickness, and death are a mystery. When doctors, physicians believe they are all powerful, and when we clergymen think we know it all, then we both blaspheme over this mystery and do ill by it. Let me confine myself to us clergymen. I believe that the main ingredient to our failure is our sufficiency, the certitude, the certainty with which we speak as if we were authorities as we explain and interpret life. To explain perhaps and interpret the other kind of life isn't so bad. In any case, who has seen it? The one who didn't find the words to describe it. But to explain and to interpret this present life is not meet. It is immoral, as Mr. Zubulaki said on the first day with his talk. Let me start, however, with my title. which is disenchantment of the healer, managing problems and finding recourse. We know that the purpose of medicine is for people to die young as latest as possible. However, the servants of medicine sometimes are disappointed. What is disappointment? Disenchantment. It is when life loses its allure, its beauty. Don't imagine that allure is to be found only in a happy life with strong health, because we all know that there are people among us who are very happy, very healthy, but who are very sorrowful because they do not know how properly to manage their happiness and their health. So what do we mean? Could it be that there is allure in sickness and pain and in death? Only a fool might claim that. On illness, we continue preaching that it is a cross. It's part of our preaching, our sermons, but we all exercise it to go away from our life. And Christians, startled, say, "Why for me, oh God, this cross?" Meaning, why didn't you give it to somebody else? We chant about death, that it is most terrible, but we adorn death with makeup and flowers as if we were ignorant of how the opposite of life is not life, it is resurrection. Christ in the Gospel says, pick up your cross, and theology explains that it is not to our interest to ask God to remove our cross from our back, but we should ask that we are fortified in our arms and back so as to bear it, to understand this irrationality of the theology of the cross. We need to speak not of life, but the mystery of life, not of pain, but of the mystery of pain, not of death, but of the mystery of death. And I really liked how Father Chrysostomos Timbas spoke yesterday, the day before, about the mystery of the silence of God. We have said much over these days, and I heard everything on faith and hope. But tell me, please, who of us can boast they believe in Christ? Who can boast they believe without subterfuge, without modification or moderation, and without holding back? In the Turkish rule and in Bolshevik Russia, we saw bishops and priests and monks and nuns repudiate Jesus, deny Christ, and is anyone prepared to condemn them for that? But this is perhaps human extremes. Goethe said, let one lose everything. Suffice it that they stay what they are. So let's come to the fact of illness as dealt with by the person that treats it. The question is the physician treating the illness allowed to his disappointment, and where would the disappointment lead, and what would it mean? And I would answer, yes, the physician treating the patient can be disenchanted on realizing they dealt negligently with a patient without particular interest, and when they realize that they dealt with him egotistically without sufficient scientific wherewithal. And this can cause headaches, sleeplessness, or even suicides, speaking of psychiatrists, or they're being dragged through the courts, and other traumas. Disenchantment and disappointment is an unavoidable feeling that is to be dealt with by human beings, by scientists, when they treat illness. Whether they admit it or no, there will be time when they will look for God, even though they never took him seriously. Constantine Tsatso said, I don't know whether the existence of God is the only proper solution to problems, but I do know he's the only solution. Either you say there is a God, or you say, I don't know, but you can't say anything else. So it is that everything is up to God. So if the miracle doesn't happen, then there will be disappointment for the person treating the disease, and failing that, there will be depression or ossification. If the miracle happens, the physician will be spared disappointment and will team up with God. And if not, he will divinify anything else depending on his spirituality. There are times, especially in neuropsychiatric disorders, that they prove incurable, that there is a feeling that nothing can be properly treated, and then it is a Gordian knot for the person treating the disease, and then perhaps they should pray in order to attain a mental balance so that they can leave this horrible frustration. Only thus can the physicians build up self-knowledge and open up those mental pathways of the soul that will lead after balance of the psyche to replace disappointment with hope. I spoke of substitution, of replacement, not substitution, which would be the easier thing. But my experience is not one of a physician. I am a pastor. We have been operating an old people's home for 56 years for 70 persons, and we have also had chronic patients shelter for 130 persons over 23 years. As president of the boards, I know their finances. The budget for the old people's home is 2 million, and for the chronic patients 4 million. And usually I step back before the pains taken by the treating physicians and the 80 nurses. For all of us, disenchantment or disappointment will mean pain for our wards. Disenchantment will lead to institutionalization, which is at a different level a kind of bodily harm. Perhaps Mr. Thodis might wish to say a few things. Well, what we see here is a development of what we find happen to patients where there is a bed sore that's getting to be quite serious. This has been there for 3 months before it was finally healed. Even in 1 week, if we send them to hospital, they are returned to us with bed sores like this. The patients, the care, the love we shall show, the expectation we have that our wards will be returned to a better quality of life, will relieve our people from pain, from degradation, will drive away disappointment and disenchantment from our treating physicians, and will make light a burden of our work in our institution for the benefit of the kin of our patients and for our local society. But I did say that the relatives of our patients sometimes become really harsh to our treating physicians, and we have been dragged to court and been sued. Another time of disappointment is when we telephone kin of our patients to inform them of their person having died, and they tell us, we can't come, you have to do what you have to do. And they put the receiver down because they are swift to forget the abandonment to which they condemn the relative and turn a page in their life. And then in the chapels of our institutions, at the funeral, it is only us and the physicians and the nurses. Disenchantment would vanish simply by a mere smile. You know what a smile is? It's this curve in the mouth that can put many wrongs right. However, this smile is hard to find quite often. So this spectrum of given disenchantment and disappointment, which is part and parcel of our human nature, how can it be dealt with and coped with by the physician? How could he preserve his hope? How could he remain upright in managing his work? There are two ways. If he doesn't believe in God, he will suffer burnout after a series of disappointments, with every day being like the day before, where there is this lip service paid, and perhaps his revenue might be improved day by day, but his self-regard would plunge to Tartarus. However, if they do believe, this faith will be like an armor that shall protect from the slings and arrows of disappointments. We know that faith, if used as mantle, leaves us unprotected. But if it becomes like isothermic underwear, then it is really strong. And I don't mean faith as faith, a theoretical acceptance of moral principles of life in Christ. I don't know whether such moral principles do exist, in fact. I mean about the genuine relationship such as His Eminence in Cameroon is building up. The gospel puts before us Jesus Christ and us that we copy what he did, and reveals the value of man as an overall reality of man. And here is the crux, fathers and brothers. We worry about the face of God and becoming like God, but forget how to be human beings. We are trying to see the face of God that no one ever has seen, nor can it be seen, and we forget how to be humane, which is why we forget that each human being should be our God, that each wounded person with bed sores, with Levine, with catheters, with Alzheimer's, those tetchy and difficult and demanding people should be our God. It would be a good thing that we clergymen stop talking about the just and punishing God. Physicians and clergymen are most unsuited to such a dialogue. Doctors, physicians, when speaking of pain, coldly and professionally. Clergymen, when we speak of death, in certainty and self-satisfied certitude, become oppressive. If, despite all that, we insist on speaking, on talking, then perhaps we should speak of our scientific failures and our theological failures. We should speak of our defeats. The best thing would be to sit by their side in silence and in prayer. Someone said, if you want to find out about the problems of human beings, live live with them. If you want to resolve them, then live with God. If, despite all this, we dare speak to patients, and we should talk to them not of the love of God, nor of his justice, but of the pain he experienced on the cross, of the shaming he experienced, the death he suffered. So you see, all ideologies, all the assets and authorities go along with man up to the graveyard. It is only Christ who comes to seek us out after that point. So to be redeemed from disenchantment and disappointment, we need to revisit and look into the value of man once again and get to their bottom. Those people are disenchanted who fail to see in human beings the allure that each man can exercise. Even he who has fallen, even he who has denigrated the image of God, for whom Christ has died. Our mission is not to save the world or the church. Our mission is to serve man. Man and his value are not to be found in the stock exchange of values. Values, religions, ideals, theologies, visions of God, faith, hope, what would their import be without man? A modern-day poem says, without us, what would the earth be? Nameless, insubstantial, depopulated. Without us, what would the heavens be? Shapes without light and without a voice to name them, without eternity. And God, what kind of thing would he be? A thing without a human visage, without a human vestment or shape. What slap or blood, what suffering without human suffering? Behold man, behold God, without human death, without the burial and lament, without the resurrection, without us, what would death be? Fathers, brothers, to be easily speaking on concepts might be wise, but it's not necessarily honest. Sickness is a violent shake-up we receive in the hands of God. For him who is insouciantly engaged in the passage of his life and is approaching hell so he can birth in its haven. We are only sure of God's love when our faith is shaken. Remember the dictum over the gate of hell. Lasciate ogni speranza voi che entrate. And from this desperate life it is that God is seeking to redeem us of. In our life, we are swimming in the mystery of the love of God for us, and that is a mystery we cannot interpret. We can only bend before it and worship it. It is a mystery where we need to be the physician and the person who treats anyone next to us. And Christians, if we cannot turn this world into a paradise, should at least prevent it from becoming a hell, as Olivier Clément said, according to what cartoon said by Arcas. Should I give you a push or should I fall with you? Now, it is something that's not taught by rationality. It is something that is taught by our faith that we have to fall. It is our hope. This jump will remove us from our isolation and our boredom. And here there is a wordplay between plixi, boredom, and ekplixi, surprise. So from boredom to surprise, God will use pain and sickness and death until he will remove tears from the eyes of human beings, until death will no longer exist, in the words of the Apocalypse. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Your Eminence, for your most dynamic and thought-provoking presentation. I now turn to my...
Και τώρα, ο Ilias Thodis για την επόμενη εισαγωγή. The next speaker is Mr. Kyriazis, who is a psychiatrist, child psychiatrist, and he will discuss the same subject, that is managing frustration and rekindling of hope with therapists. Many thanks. I would like to express my thanks to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, to Father Stavros Kofinas for his honorary invitation to participate in this conference. Also, I would like to warmly congratulate His Eminence of Rhodes, who organized, coordinated this conference. Excellent organization indeed, and congratulations for selecting this subject to the organizing committee. Eminences, Your Graces, dear Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, the title is Impulse and Hope in the Psychoanalytic Procedure, a clinical picture of Electra. And this is a natural follow-up after His Eminence of Cameroon and His Eminence of Alexandroupolis. I would like to thank His Eminence of Alexandroupolis because he paved the way for me to relate to a few issues we encounter with our therapy. We have two known narrations. The first is of Jonah, the Old Testament, and the second is from the Gerontokon. And as you may know, they relate to the tribulations to which an abbot submitted his servant to water a dead tree, a log, until it sprouts. The impulse in psychoanalytical therapy is expressed in three different forms: enactment, negative reaction to therapy, and perception reversal. I will not take your time with complex concepts. Maybe you're also already aware of such theory, but I would like to convey to you my experience. The causes of this impulse, of course, are manifold, but they follow two main axes. The first is the erotic sexual involvement of the therapist, and the second axis is the aggressive destructiveness that develops in the therapeutic relation and leads to an impulse. I would like to stress that in all cases there is an involvement by the therapist. His Eminence of Alexandroupolis rightly referred to the despair, the frustration of the therapist. Freud now, in 1937, a couple of years before he died, tried to deal with this impulse and submitted a text in which he describes when psychotherapy is interminable. It never ends, that is. A very interesting text indeed. Actually, he says that this impulse makes therapy interminable for both sides, the therapist and the psychoanalyst, until they get tired and they put an end to their relationship, or until something tragic happens, like suicide. So I will invite you to our therapy cuisine. The dish here is Electra. She's 18 years old, and we are 1 year down the road after we started psychoanalysis. I will try to describe the dish we prepared, Electra and myself. The impulse develops on the axis of aggressive destructiveness. What is the clinical picture? Electra says I'm not well. I have a headache. Maybe it's the heat or the Lyrica or the other medication I get. I'm now below 45 kilos. Although I keep eating the same amount, I cannot put on any weight. And I had a nightmare last night. I was going down the stairs. I was uneasy. I heard on TV that a disaster is coming. I see the drizzle, and I think a storm is coming. I don't know where to hide. I'm in agony and panic. You know, this repeated crisis of panic that keep haunting me. I tried to recall our first meeting, our first session. She entered my office. She was a lean figure, thin, almost bony, like a reed shaken by the wind. I had the impression that she was about to die. The air was thick. There was agony in the air. Even today, at that time, that is 1 year down the road, she was intelligent, learned, ambitious, very shy. She was almost whispering. I felt like extending my hand to support her, not to collapse on the floor. When she came to find me, she was 40 kilos. She couldn't sleep. She suffered from anorexia and repeated serious crises of panic. She wanted to commit suicide. She also told me she had irregular period and that she had no interest in sexual or erotic themes. My general impression was that, yes, she was intelligent, learned, and a very nice girl with religious interests, very capable in handling symbolical thought. However, she was in the suicidal thread. She was then and she was still today. So, is there a window of hope to support her psyche, bleeding, ready to abandon hope? So, I look at Electra, I leave my reverie and tell her, you're trying to hide in the sleep of death. Your desire is to die. You're avoiding to face the failure of your family environment in the past, but you are reluctant to see your failure in your life now. Just like Jonah, you're defying God's commandment. He didn't want to go to Nineveh to preach the word of God. She was very well aware, very familiar with the story. He wanted, or rather he was ordered to preach the word of God, but he was scared. He could be killed by the locals in Nineveh, so he fled. Of course, he did not avoid the worst, because when the storm broke out, he told the truth to the sailors. He considered himself as guilty and asked them to throw him in the sea for his guilt, in order for him to die, to sacrifice himself. And that's what the sailors did. And then he was swallowed by the whale. So as another Jonah, I told her, you embark the ship and attempt the eternal sleep. You're trying to avoid your own Nineveh, and I hope that you do not jump in the water. You will not redeem yourself in this way. Then there was silence, a long silence, and I told her, Nineveh for you is some story from the past that you experience as if it were the present. Disaster lies in your soul, but it has happened in the past. There's a tormenting memory that haunts you. You experience disaster time and time again. Today, your dream is your old yearning, the longing. And now you feel panic about the storm, which is none other than the idea to kill your mother, who could not understand you, and your father, who drove you mad. Then another long silence ensued. And then she said, I have hatred for my mother and my father. I was so angry with them when I was a child. I was throwing things from the balcony. Later I stopped. I became a good girl. And then somebody else took control in his hands. Doctor, listen. There's a delirious I want in myself. This I want becomes more and more dangerous. I want you to understand. I want to die, and I need your help in that. Then another silence. And she continued, I was with my mother, and I saw a painting while driving, a figure in white. He grasps this blonde girl with brown eyes. The girl tries to free herself, but the figure in white veils tries to engulf her. This is what I feel today. This is the play that life and death play with me. I retorted, very interesting. Haran, death, dressed in white, grasps the girl who tries to escape. This is you trying to escape. With your heart, your strength, and your passions, you will not be able to free yourself. You will not free yourself from me. Are you confusing me with your mother? Are you afraid that at the end of the day I am the figure who pushes you to death? Another silence. And then I told her, I think that unconsciously, subconsciously rather, you're trying to destroy our work together. You're trying to destroy what I'm trying to offer you. You don't want to trust me. You may realize that I have good intentions, but at the end of the day, I'm that figure in a white veil with white hair, like him on the painting. It's my veils engulfing you, and they are black. You want to avoid me, to expedite the sleep of death. You want to avoid the painful memories, your personal destruction. Death speaks through your body that loses weight, and it is your body that expresses this I want, the delirious want. The passion of disaster prevails. You're now at 44 kilos. By the way, she had put on some weight up to 50, and then she was again 44. Electra nodded condescendingly. That was the end of the session. I was suffocating, and I told her this. I tried to turn to practicalities. I said, there is hope. If needed, we go to hospital. If you work with a dietitian, you will be able to put some weight. This is a very important step. Well, do we have to go to hospital? Personally, I told her, I don't want to lose you. I will not give up. I can see your despair, the delirious I want, the body that does not obey. You see, this body has its own language. Well, what about our next session? Are you coming? A while later, she said, I will take some measures. I will get some help from the dietitian. But I will come next time, yes. This in Alexandroupolis says that Saint Seraphim of Sharov would welcome his visitors with, welcome my joy, Christ is risen. I smiled, and she replied with another smile. I told her that the saint wanted to remind his visitor that there is hope. That's why he kept repeating, Christ is risen. Well, suppose we went to meet him. What would happen? Actually, by the way, I have visited his hut 20 years ago. Another silence. As I was seeing her out, I repeated steadily, solidly, "Welcome, Electra. Christ is risen." Well, I gave you these details in order to put you in the picture, literally. But allow me some theoretical comments. What have we got here? Therapist and a psychoanalyst in despair. A therapist who does not abandon hope and who keeps watering the cut-down tree, the dead tree, the log, like the servant in the narration of the Gerontikon, that Tarkovsky emulates in his film The Sacrifice. Electra lives in a barren world, detached from people. Psychically, she's dead. She wants to leave, to depart, to live in the tomb. However, she continues her sessions. She does her best. She maintains her hope in God. She encourages herself and the therapist, reminding him that if Christ is risen, then there is hope. Then I wondered why she related this story, and I concluded that it was to support me. The stance of Electra's brings me to mind a poem by Winnicott, which is supposed to be autobiographical. The poem goes like this: "Mother below is weeping, weeping, weeping. Thus I knew her. Once stretched out on her lap, as now on dead tree, I learned to make her smile, to stem her tears, to undo her guilt, to cure her inward death. To enliven her was my living." Winnicott describes here the wise toddler of Ferenczi, the young boy who tries to provide consolation to his mother. This is what Electra was. She functioned as just a toilet where her mother would throw her waste, the waste of her soul, as we say in psychoanalysis. This preconception about the world and the other man was negative. This negativism is a symptom with regard to food, love, and the reception of the other, the new. Everything from the outside world is perceived as an intrusion, a phallic intrusion, and this is what we call intrusion anxiety. This is where her family environment led her. And now she identifies with the aggressor, and she develops her defense, the sadistic and masochist drive to kill her mother and redeem herself by dying. And this is her impulse. On a philosophical and metapsychological level, Electra feels already dead, a dead object thrown around in an inhospitable Platonic land, like in Plato Timeo. This land is mentally saturated, full of aggressiveness and hostility. From this land, unconscious and unthinkable for Electra, from this land, Electra moves to the figure on the painting, dressed in white, Haron, the death. This is what she pulls out of her psychic motherland. And this land is not exactly what happened with the family, what her father or mother did. I will not go into these details. This land, as described by Plato, and as Christopher perceives it, and I share this vision, is a special situation. If we have more time later, I will try to describe it in more detail. But this is good food for thought, very important for psychoanalytic therapy. Electra doesn't possess a solid such land. She cannot delimitate and contain the other. And in this, she is like her hypochondriac mother. She defends herself in a paranoidal situation. She cannot forgive, she cannot love, she cannot accept the other, she cannot surrender herself. The air of death is part of this psychic climate, so Electra keeps everyone away from her. And then I remembered another image from 30 years ago. It was the psychoanalysis of a young, beautiful female doctor. I will call her Irini. She would have this dream. There was a strong wind. I would open the shutters and the wind would carry me out. I would fall and be killed. I referred to dreams because they are symbolical, they can be briefly described, but they depict very well the internal psychic situation. I don't want to relate at length to the clinical picture. So I was under stress. I wouldn't stand having her commit suicide while she would be under my supervision. Then I referred her to another analyst with her agreement. However, 6 months later, I was informed that she attempted suicide, but she survived, fortunately. I later thought that Irini had felt my stress. She understood I was under stress. That is why she left me for another analyst, and then she abandoned the other one too. So she repeated the enactment of total abandonment until the stage of death. And that was the fear that had inundated me. I'm saying all this without being totally certain about the state of her psychic land. I behaved like another Jonah. I abandoned my patient, I abandoned my Nineveh, and went to bed. 6 months later, as I said, the tragedy happened. Irini tried to commit suicide. It was not that important that this had happened while she was under the supervision of somebody else. Irini tried to destroy her body. Her body suffered, carrying a contradictory psychic situation, unbearable pain. Electra was more or less the same, but I faced a similar situation in a different manner. Let me say at this point that the session I described in the beginning, paradoxically for me, led to something positive. It was a psychic transformation that I realized later, in a later session, when Electra said explicitly, but through another dream, that she decided to abandon her plan to commit suicide. She would work with me, accepting my terms and the terms of the therapeutical framework. She would try to take care of her body and put on weight. I felt at that time that she had accepted me as a therapist, her therapist, someone coming from the future with his own proposal. I was coming to meet her. That was exactly what she had refused for 1 entire year. Thus, I felt that the intrusion anxiety, the fear of Electra, was attenuated, and that was hope for me. Electra rejected the psychic vestment of the motherland. And that was our greatest feat. It is difficult because we have the anxiety of death. This stress takes the form of anxiety of death. In these cases, you must reject a certain self. Electra was fully dependent and alienated in her psychic mother diving bell, so to speak, which resembles a tomb. From a psychic point of view, she isn't born yet. She's trying still to leave the body of the whale, just like Jonah. But this requires external help, the hand of God. This requires external help. This cannot happen by itself. And Electra tries to be thrown out, if possible, even violently, out of this sick psychic land that torments her. That is why death is her medicine, it's her solution. She'd rather die than live. At the same time, however, and this is interesting, she wanted to take revenge. And she could take revenge through committing suicide. It's such a contradictory stance, and this makes her ambiguous to others, full of fear, and this is what makes her vulnerable. It is as if her self is built on sand. Borges has written a great verse. I mean, it's applicable here. So through Electra, you can see the relationship with the mother. Sometimes we build houses on sand. We know they are built on sand, but we know that we have to keep building houses on sand. Sometimes we realize that our self, our ego, is built on sand. In concluding, let me say this. I believe that each therapist, under certain condition, under pressure, can feel desperate. His Eminence describes such conditions. So, under pressure, we might have to flee, like Jonah. So we have to become more resilient vis-a-vis the negative. It's what Byron described as negative capability. Then the other narration about the servant watering the log stresses and underlines this need, this no mean feat. This is the reason why those who deal with people, be it therapists, politicians, managers, etc., sometimes feel desperate. They feel a burnout in front of the impasse. The Saint of Ilion has described this. So all those managers, therapists, etc., have this secret. They try to engage with therapy. They try to provide therapy to people who symbolically have built their houses on sand. And this is a very difficult feat. It is always difficult when you have to do with people. The parameters in Electra is the so-called holding and the also so-called containment of the therapist. The therapist, as a new universe, becomes the messenger from another psychic land, containing with reflection and emotion with his heart the uncontainable, the non-containable stress, the sadness and the psychic pain of the patient. Sometimes, of course, we fail. We cannot contain the pain of the patient. That is why we then build our own defenses. So the therapist tries to, quote unquote, resurrect a healthy framework, a solid psychic land on which you can build a proper house. Thus you will be able to feel you're at home, that you belong to somewhere, as Ms. Hadjouli said yesterday. As a psychoanalyst used to say, in order to play with life, just like the actor in the theater, you need a solid basis, the floor on which you can tread. This solid floor is the motherland, the unwithering rose. This is what this is Electra's eternal quest. Thank you.